Good evening. I'm Afton Thomas, Associate Director for Programs at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, and I am so excited to see all of you here this evening. Thank you for spending your evening with us. So this evening we are celebrating an important film and its Oxford premiere. Our Movement Starts Here is a feature-length documentary produced and directed by two of my colleagues, John Rash, two of our colleagues, quite a few people, John Rash and Melanie Ho, for the Southern Documentary Project with support from the University of Mississippi Environmental Studies minor. Although the film has been screened elsewhere and will continue to make its way around the country and even to South Africa in a film festival next month, tonight is special because we are also joined by two of the film's stars, Ms. Dollie Burwell and Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Two very important figures in the environmental justice movement. And if that wasn't enough, Allison Friday, yes, I haven't even had a chance to meet you, is the composer who scored the film. So let's give Allison. Thank you. My charge this evening is to make a few announcements, provide the roadmap for the evening, and introduce the filmmakers. Our SouthTalks events are a team effort. Thank you to the Center's communication specialist, Rebecca Locke-Cleary, for spreading the word, Sheila Ricketts for creating the promotional graphics, and Greta Kashanina for recording each talk and making them available on our YouTube channel. And tonight, they were expert cake cutters. So thank you to Greta and Sheila. Yes, helping my visions come to life. If you have not already, please sign in either on the paper sign-in sheet that should be circulating, or we've gotten a little fancy this year, go big or go home. We have QR code for our sign-in as well as a survey at the end, but you can go ahead and use the QR code to open up the survey, and then you can complete it later. And because I'm always trying to keep us on time, it'll take you 2 minutes, I promise, okay? But we appreciate your feedback. After the film, the filmmakers will be joined by Mrs. Dollie Burwell and Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis for a 30-minute panel discussion. Dr. Castell-Sweet will moderate the discussion. And now, to formally introduce the filmmakers and brag on some of their accomplishments, Melanie Ho is a second-generation Vietnamese American with roots in Florida. Since graduating from the University of California, Santa Cruz's Social Documentation MFA program, Mel has worked on various projects as a director, editor, and cinematographer. She is an assistant professor of practice at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture. Her work focuses on trauma, familial relationships, gender, displacement, and intimacy. Assistant Professor of Film Production and Southern Studies, John Rash is a filmmaker, photographer, video artist, and founder of the Southern Punk Archive. John earned his MFA in Experimental Documentary Arts from Duke University in 2014 and has since worked as a visual storyteller and educator in both the United States and China. John has produced and directed several award-winning films and was the recipient of the Soul of Southern Film Award from Indie Memphis Film Festival and the Excellence in Community Engagement Award with distinction from the University of Mississippi. You will hear more from them after the film. Let's give them a round of applause. Wow. Very beautiful. I saw an early cut. Beautiful, moving, powerful. How many environmental studies minors do we have in here right now? Okay, how many environmental coalition members do we have? Nice, great. I mean, this was a manual, right? So many, I don't have the words, beautiful, and thank you all. And Allison, beautiful music. You're moving. Okay, 30 minutes left. I am a keeper of time. 8 o'clock, hard stop. Okay, I'm going to introduce our moderator for our panel discussion, and then I invite our panelists to have a seat up here. Dr. Castell Sweet, is an embedded sociologist and community builder who works at the intersections of community, culture, and race, particularly emphasizing placemaking and place-based engagement. Seems very appropriate for our discussion. She serves as the director of the Center for Community Engagement here at the University of Mississippi, an assistant professor of practice and community engagement. My own script, it says, at the University of Mississippi. In this role, she supports the development of mutually beneficial community campus partnerships. I am looking forward to their conversation. Please help me welcome Dr. Castell Sweet.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to try to make sure I keep to the 30 minutes as well, or Ashton won't invite me back. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest. We heard about our filmmakers, but we also have two distinguished guests with us that we're going to hear from this evening before we all let you go. So Dr. Benjamin Chavis is an esteemed civil rights leader, global business leader, faith leader, and public intellectual. He was born in Oxford, North Carolina. His family has deep roots in Greenville County, North Carolina, as landowners, farmers, educators, theologians, physicians, and activists for over 250 years. In his youth, in the early 1960s, Chavis was the North Carolina statewide youth coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, assistant to Dr. Martin Luther King, who inspired him to work and become a Christian minister in the civil rights movement. At the age of 24, Reverend Chavis rose to international prominence in 1972 as the leader of the Wilmington 10 in North Carolina, civil rights activists who were political prisoners as designated by the Amnesty International and who were unjustly convicted of committing arson. Today, Chavis hosts the Chavis Chronicles, a weekly broadcast on PBS, and Dr. Chavis is currently the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association based in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Dr. Chavis. We also have Ms. Dollie Burwell. Dollie was born, raised, and attended public schools in Vance County, North Carolina. In 1982, Dollie led her community in a protest against the state of North Carolina, which the Wilmington Post called the greatest civil rights movement since the 1960s. She was arrested and jailed 5 times and spent nights in jail when she blocked trucks carrying PCB-loaded soil that was to be put in a dump in her community by lying down in the front of the trucks. This was the beginning of the environmental justice movement. She served as co-chair of the working group that secured both state and federal funding to detoxify the PCB landfill in 2004. For her activism and work against environmental racism and for environmental justice, Mrs. Burwell has been recognized and written about in many books, newspapers, and TV shows. She has received numerous honors and awards. Mrs. Burwell retired after more than 30 years as a congressional staffer, serving with 3 different members of Congress. She has one daughter, Mia, with whom she lives and enjoys as her travel partner. She remains passionate about environmental justice and enjoys speaking about the importance of activism, especially to young people. Welcome, Ms. Dollie. And of course, we wouldn't be here tonight with our 2 filmmakers. So I welcome Melanie and John to also join us. So I echo Afton in how beautiful of a story, both in the story in and of itself, as well as the portrayal of the story in film. But particularly for Dr. Chavis and Miss Dollie, for you to think back on this work, because I'm sure when you got involved in it, originally you didn't think about the impact that it would continue to have so many decades later. So now, as the film was being created and as you continue to review the story on film, what does that feel like for you to reflect on the work that you have been doing over the last couple of years?
Well, I just said to Dr. Chavis that this is my first time seeing the entire film. I've seen snippets of it. But it stirs a lot of emotions, and it brings back to me that first day that I learned that the state of North Carolina was going to put the PCB dump in Warren County. My emotions ran the gamut. At first, it was fear, a feeling of disappointment that the state would do its poorest and its blackest county such an injustice. And to understand that EPA, an agency that was tasked with protecting people, was going along with it. But my last emotion was just one of determination and anger. And I decided right then and there that I was going to fight and stand up against the state, and that I would use every skill that I had learned by serving on the board for the Commission for Racial Justice and serving on the board for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that I would use everything in my power to organize my community, to fight and to stand up against the state of North Carolina.
Great. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be on this panel. Every time I see Dollie Burwell, gives me great inspiration. One of the things that neither one of our bios say is that Dollie and I are members of the same church in Warren County, North Carolina, Gregory Congregational, not Gregory, Oak Level United Church of Christ in Warrenton. It's in Warren County. So when this PC dump proposal was first proposed, we knew that something was wrong with the proposal. But more fundamentally, to answer your question, I want to thank the filmmakers. Because to me, this is a film not just about Warren County. This is a film not just about North Carolina. This is a film not just about the South. This is a film not just about the United States. This is a film about whether or not humanity can survive inhumanity. Because what took place in Warren County in 1982 was inhumanity. Now, yes, I coined the term environmental racism at that time, and I've had a lot of time to think about it. I teach a course at Duke University now on environmental justice. And the first class, I say to everybody, there's only one race, and that's the human race. We're all part of one human family. But because of prejudices, because of inhumanities, we don't even recognize our togetherness. We don't even recognize the oneness of our humanity. You notice in the film, there's a lot of preachers. Well, Dollie is a preacher. She violates it. She preaches without a license. And it's because of her, those of us that do have a license do what we do much more effectively. I think one of the things that the film documents is that this struggle is intergenerational. That this struggle is multiracial, multicultural, multilingual. And what started there, this is my last point, in 1982, now has grown to a worldwide movement all over the United States. So yes, Dollie, standing up does make a difference. Speaking out does make a difference. Particularly when you stand up and speak out, not only for your own self, but for those in the community and for others whose names we probably will never know, but who all need someone to stand up and speak out for them. My background is civil rights. I come out of the civil rights movement. And at the time, the two movements were separate, as I said. So what brought the environmental movement and the civil rights movement together was now known as the environmental justice movement, but it's also known as the climate justice movement. Because there are some people who try to say, well, climate is over here, environment is over here, but it's all one movement.
And
I'll try to give you shorter answers. I'm a preacher.
But I was going to say, I'm not going to cut you off. You're the guest. So we want to hear everything you have to say. But I definitely agree with how this story could be used to just illustrate the impact on humanity. So my question for Melanie and John is why this story to capture on film? But two, how did you balance that historical piece of capturing this story, but also bringing it to an audience that could be anyone that may not be familiar with environmental justice, may not be familiar with Warren County, may not be familiar with the specifics, but can also connect and resonate with the story? So how did you capture that and do that within an hour and a half?
I hope we did. I don't know. I mean, I think we did our best to do all those things. That was the goal. So first, how did we come to the story? I'm originally from North Carolina. I was aware of modern day injustices that are happening in North Carolina with over-industrialization of Eastern North Carolina with hog farms and chicken farms, coal ash issues. So my original question was, how could this still be happening in North Carolina 40 years later? And actually set off to make a film that was mostly about those contemporary issues, but quickly came to realize that there wasn't even a singular landmark publication about Warren County. There wasn't a book about it. There definitely wasn't a film about it. And it seemed that that was a more pressing story that needed to be told. So the more I learned about what happened in Warren County and folks like Ms. Burwell and Dr. Chavis and their life trajectory, then the past came to the future or to the present and then on to the future, because it started to see how this 1 6-week moment changed the lives of so many people and set them on a path of engagement with their counties, their state, with the nation. And then that became the goal of the film, was to try to put all of those stories into the film. So having the 40th anniversary in the film actually helps to bring it out of the history books and into the present. Seeing folks like Cameron Oglesby in the film was a way to sort of imagine what any young activist, folks that are fighting for free Palestine right now, folks that are, engaged in any contemporary issue, that could be the moment for them to end up in the shoes of these honored guests that we have here 40 years later in their lives.
I think filmmaking as a medium also is a means of accessible storytelling, at least for me. I think it's a way for us as filmmakers who have the skills to use a camera, use a mic, to get that in front of folks that have the stories and know that it's not all encompassing of the entire history and even the present, but capturing enough so that it can start a conversation. And hopefully this is an inkling of starting a conversation. And I think we've been really lucky to have folks that were in the film come and talk to an audience. From our other film screenings, like Reverend Kearney has come, Wayne has come, other folks have come to engage with an audience. And I think that's one of the best things from filmmaking that we've experienced.
Yeah. There's definitely a power, right, in capturing the stories on film and then those stories being able to travel places that those stories may never go, right? Because orally it travels, but it can get a lot further when it's captured and documented and cemented. But I like, John, how you talked about, you started off trying to address some of the current things and realized you had to go back and capture some of that history, because it's important to know that history in order to understand even some tools and resources of how to address some current things. So my question is, considering the things that we're dealing with today, the things around environmental justice, climate justice, social justice, even if you want to get to specifics around what's going on with the EPA and resources and policies, how could we think about this story that was shared, so that from your perspective, Melanie and John, how the story could be used to connect to this current day? And then Dr. Chavis and Ms. Dollie, how could you think about your experience through Warren County? What would you recommend of how to connect to the folks who are trying to advocate for resources, advocate for change, advocate for communities? What does that look like? And what are the similarities and the synergies between what happened in Warren County, but also the things that we're currently dealing with right now?
That's a long question. I will give you a short answer, then let the others. I think this film captures, first, actual facts and truths. There are a lot of things out there in the audiovisual world that are fake, not true. In particular on social media, people get aroused by things that engenders prejudice, engenders separateness, engenders making people susceptible to think that their interests is better than other people's interests. So I would recommend that this film be seen not just on every college campus, but every high school, every junior high school, every elementary school, and every pre-K school. Why? Because we need to learn from history. I think if you are ahistorical, you become apolitical. And a lot of the public policy makers today are ahistorical and therefore apolitical.
And I'll just say briefly that I see this film in so many different spaces. Back in June, I had the opportunity to go and be a part of a panel at the Environmental Protection Agency in the Research Triangle Park. And when I walked in the door, I noticed how many African Americans that are employed at EPA doing in all facets. But I was also surprised in EPA in the Research Triangle Park hosted the We Birthed the Movement. And the first thing that came to my mind was, if we'd had those people at EPA in 1982, we probably wouldn't have had the dump. But so I see stages of progress and probably in a different perspective than many people. I also had the opportunity to go back in July and speak to some young people, middle school and high school students who project was to clean up the Anacostia River in D.C. That's a Black community in Washington, D.C. And I was so encouraged because they wanted me to come and talk to them about how to organize and get their community engaged in the project that they had decided to do. So as Dr. Chavis said, I see this film as not just a part of history, but a part of the future. And that is the great thing for and that's what lifts my spirit, that I see this film that connecting with the past, the present, and the future.
Well, you know, as filmmakers, our goal is to tell stories and start conversations. And I think that one thing that we really hope that this film would do and that we've been able to do is, as Dollie mentioned, take it to different spaces. And there's all these little vignettes in the film that we're able to use even when folks aren't able to watch the full 82 minutes that you all just saw. So in April, we went to the National Environmental Justice Conference in Washington, D.C., and we were only able to show 10 minutes of the film, but then we had a panel discussion like this. And in that situation, it was a conversation about folks like Mrs. Burwell, Dr. Chavis, and what happened after the protests and how to build sustainable movements so that when the imminent danger passes, when the news cameras go away, how to keep the community engaged, how to keep that momentum and energy moving forward so that folks can be aware of that and building intentionally and thinking about organizing in ways that isn't just going to fracture as soon as, whether they win or lose, at some point the threat's going to pass, right? So I think that just this idea of helping to amplify a story like this and then thinking about the different aspects of the story that you saw, 2 months ago, 3 months now, 3 months ago, I would have never imagined that the story that you see, that's sort of the implicit story in this film about Dollie and Eva Clayton and their engagement with their lives in politics would be so present as it is right now, thinking about what's coming ahead 47 days from now and the choice that we have, and how voices from marginalized communities, when given a seat at the table and the ability to advocate for those communities, can make a big difference. And now we're sitting in a place where that part of the film starts an even more interesting conversation in the nation's current political environment. So I think that just that idea of amplifying voices, telling stories, letting the community tell their own story, then lets people see themselves in the story, and then we can have a conversation.
So speaking of vignettes, there was one piece that I actually had to replay back because it stuck with me so much. It was from Jenny LeBaum, am I saying that right? The photographer, in her book that she had put together. But I really, really, really like the quote. So I want to end with with that quote. They lay in the roads not just to stop the trucks from dumping PCB-tainted soil. They fought for environmental justice, the right for all communities to have a safe environment and a right to participate in decision-making that will affect their lives. So I say thank you to the work that you all did, inviting not just for your communities, but for all communities. And thank you to the filmmakers for taking that story and amplifying it so that it gives us tools and resources that we can continue to do the same for all communities. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Can I add? Thank you. You mentioned Jenny LeBaum. Jenny LeBaum is coming here October 10th. Is it October 10th? The exhibit that you saw in the film is across the street right now at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, Barnard Observatory, and Jenny will be here to give a gallery walk and talk through that exhibit next month. So we invite you to check out the SouthTalks schedule, 5:30 on October 10th. Thank you, Afton. Afton does all the hard work to organize those events. So if you want to meet Jenny in person, Jenny was a student at Duke University, her very first photography class.
Wow.
And her self-chosen assignment was to go up to Warren County and photograph those protests. The photojournalists who were on that assignment could only be there the first day, maybe once a week after. They had other things they had to, Jenny was the only one going every single day. And those iconic photos that you saw in the film and that you can see printed on paper across the street, she was a student, just like many of the people in this classroom, and ended up documenting history. That's now in a film 40 years later, has been on display at the EPA 40 years later, and she went on to become a lifelong journalist. So, I think that's part of why, again, this is important to us, is trying to tell those stories. Hopefully this film, hopefully Jenny's photos will be here long after we're gone and continues to preserve those stories. So sorry to add that at the end after
That
you
was a great
one.
And let me just say too that one piece that I think has to be followed up that was sort of included in this film, but not as much as I think it needs to be a follow-up, is the political piece of what happened out of, Warren County has always been a predominantly black county. Even during slavery, there were 14,000 slaves, about 600 free Negroes, and about 4,000 Europeans. But we had never elected a representative government. But we took that time between 1978 and 1982 to register African Americans. And during 1982, we elected for the first time, as you heard, Congresswoman Clay, chair of the county commissioners. We elected a representative government on the board of county commissioners, on the school board. So we increased our political power. And we elected those people on boards and in office that we knew. And that was one of the reasons why Governor Hunt had to live up to his promise, is because we had elected Senator Frank Balance, who was my attorney during that time, to the North Carolina State Senate. So between the funding from the state and the federal government, because Congresswoman Clayton was in Congress at the time. So it all came together as a result of that political piece that came together as a result of us being done. You heard Congresswoman Clayton talk a little bit about it, but it's a really great piece around communities gaining political empowerment and making those decisions that affect their community.
And I just want to say, I know we're over time, and we have the gatekeeper there. I want to thank the composer again, because music,
Yes.
music and culture, the cultural arts, sometimes we play that down, but that's so important. Because of the composition, it helps us to remember what we saw. It helps us not only to see, to hear, but to feel. This is a film that you have to feel in order to extract its enduring lessons. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.